Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera, where it's an absolutely beautiful day today at Hinokicho Park. It's very warm out today, a little bit too warm for this windbreaker which I'm wearing. The sun is shining, the cherry blossoms are well past their prime, but they're still in the trees and people are still here enjoying them. It's very green, the air is nice and clean and clear, the birds are chirping and having fun around me. It's a great time to come out and make a video. The cherry blossom season is especially interesting to me, or special to me, because it's the time of year which I first arrived in Japan, and the anniversary of my arrival is coming in a couple of days. It's really hard to believe it, but in a couple of days I'll have been in Japan for 14 years. 14 years is quite a long time. When I was young, 14 years was an eternity. Now 14 years goes by with a surprising rapidity. When I first came to Japan, of course, I was kind of committed to coming here for the long term, but now that I've been here for the long term, it's kind of surreal to have done so and experienced it. And of course, I don't have any plans to leave Japan soon, and hopefully I'll be here another 14 years, and hopefully much more than that. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started with the subject of today's video. And as it said in the title of the video, today I'm going to be talking about the cheapest of the Yashica Electro 35 series of cameras, and that is the Yashica 35ME, which was released in Japan in the early 1970s. Now, this camera was made to fill a particular niche in the photography market, mainly in Japan. This camera was designed mainly for university students. For those of you who are unfamiliar with how things work, in Japan, during your lifetime, you have pretty much three major periods. You have your youth, which you spend in primary school. You have your university years, and then you have your professional career, which takes up most of your life. Two of these periods are quite difficult, and one is not so difficult. The two difficult periods are primary school and your professional life, whereas your university years tend to be a time when Japanese people kick back or travel or relax. Sounds kind of strange. In Japan, you start your primary school years studying like crazy, going to cram school, your parents using their holidays to help you study to get past the exams and all that. And all this with the goal of getting into a good university. Because if you can get into a good university, you can move on to getting a job in a good company, and the rest of your life is set. When you join a Japanese company, the hours are long, the vacations are few and far between, and though the work isn't especially demanding, on the other hand, it's not very challenging. It's kind of an interesting situation to work in a company in Japan. You are guaranteed an income for the rest of your life, and your company takes care of a lot of things. It takes care of your housing and such when you're younger. It arranges for a lot of other things to help you get through your life. On the negative side, you don't get many days off, and the pay in Japan is rather small compared to America or Europe when you consider the amount of hours you actually work. On the other hand, it's very difficult to get fired short of committing a crime. Pretty much, it's kind of like being the hamster put on the treadmill for a really long time. You're in a nice, warm, and comfortable place when you're fed every day, but you have to keep your feet moving on the treadmill in order to keep the machine going and whatever. However, university life in Japan is quite easy. Once you get into university, you've pretty much made it. All you really have to do is show up for your lectures, maybe 51% of the time, and you're pretty much going to graduate. Unless you're going on to become to graduate school or something like that, you don't really have to do so much in university. And you'll find that it doesn't really matter what you study in university, because pretty much anytime you study for any particular subject, when you were hired by a company to do a job, you can pretty much bet all of your money that what they hire you to do is going to be completely different than what you studied in university. So as the university years are kind of the easy time in the life of a Japanese person, they tend to do a lot of traveling. Domestically and around the world and whatever. They spend a lot of time with friends, and one thing you want to do when you travel and spend time with friends and do fun things is take pictures of these moments. And so cameras like the Electro 35ME were made to record these moments. This camera, as I said, was made in the early 1970s, around the same time as the GL, GX, MC, and other Yashica cameras. It was the least expensive camera and was especially appealing to college students because in the early 1970s, Japan was dealing with rather hard financial times. During the 60s and whatever, Japan had been kind of loose in manipulating its currency in order to keep the yen weak, to make Japanese products more competitive in other places. But unfortunately, by the early 70s, runaway inflation hit Japan of a really ridiculously high nature. And this was, of course, a difficult thing for working people. Japan's economic policy to stop this problem was to end the printing of money for 5 years. So it was a rather difficult 5-year period in Japan where the Japanese faced a lot of economic hardship. But after 5 years, the value of the yen stabilized, just in time for the dollar and other currencies in other parts of the West to get into runaway inflation. But a lot of things which were produced for the domestic economy in the early 70s in Japan were inexpensive things like this. So anyway, now that I've gotten through about 6 minutes of this kind of talk, let's go ahead and talk more about the nuts and bolts of this camera with a description of all the features and functions and everything starting at the top. At the top here we have this chrome rewind button with a pop-out lever. This is the same rewind knob you will find on, say, the Yashica MC and also on cameras like the half 17 or Electro half, except that they put it on the bottom on those cameras. We have a shoe here for mounting a flash. This camera was designed to work with the Yashica flashes of the day, and it offers automatic operation or simple operation with the Yashica flashes. This camera is bare bones enough that it doesn't include a PC sync socket anywhere else on the camera. So to operate this camera with a flash, you have to have a flash which has a center pin in the shoe on the bottom, and luckily most modern flashes include something like that. But this camera will not work with the old vintage flash bulbs, which were still very common at the time it was produced. Over here we have the shutter release button, which accepts a standard cable release. And interesting thing that they put around here was a plastic bushing, which I actually think this is a good idea because it reduces friction without the need for lubricating, and you don't have to worry much about this shutter button sticking. I wish this was a feature which they put on certain other cameras, especially earlier Yashica cameras where it can sometimes be an issue. And of course the shutter button luckily accepts a standard cable release. Here we have the film winding and shutter charging lever, very similar in design to what we find on, say, the Yashica MC. Moving to the back of the camera, we have the viewfinder window, same size as the viewfinder window which you find in other Yashica cameras of this vintage. On the bottom here we have the battery chamber cover. And what sets this camera apart from most other Yashicas of the time is that it uses an easy to find and currently available battery. The Yashica ME uses an ordinary LR44 or SR44 battery, which you can get for just a few cents off of Amazon. Of course, I always recommend the SR44 batteries, the silver oxide batteries, because they offer better performance than alkaline LR44 batteries. Here we have a standard 1/4-inch tripod socket, and over here we have the release button, which you have to depress in order to rewind the film. On the front of the camera we have the viewfinder window, and then we have this matte glass here which is for the projected frame lines. Now this is a scale focus camera, not a rangefinder camera, and so there isn't a rangefinder window on the front, and the information in the camera, despite it being a scale focus camera, is actually quite good. This camera features a built-in light meter, and as you look through the viewfinder, and you can see the projected frame lines inside, which make it very easy to compose your image. And to the right side you will see the meter needle, which runs up and down a scale of aperture and shutter combinations. And it's kind of interesting to have this feature. It's better than like on the MC where it's not visible, because with this camera when you depress the shutter button you can actually see which shutter speed and aperture the camera is going to select. And it lets you know if you have to hold the camera more firmly, say that the shutter speed is going way down to say 1/30th of a second or so. So a very good system on this, and it makes the camera, I guess, more predictable, or allows you to control the camera better when you're shooting with it. On the bottom here we have the self-timer, which is located in the body of the camera rather than in the lens. And this is a great location for the self-timer. These self-timers which were installed in the body tend to be more reliable and less prone to failure than the ones which are mounted in the lenses. First, they are sealed better when they are in the body, so it's less likely that the hard steel parts are going to get corroded and cause the self-timer to stick. And I find it a much more reliable system than the other Electro 35s, which have the self-timer still built into the lens assembly. At the very base here of the lens, we have the selector ring, and this switches between the auto setting and a guide number scale for using the flash. In most cases, you will of course set the camera to auto and operate it like so, but if you're using a flash, you have to use the guide number system for the flash, depending on the range that you have between yourself and your subject. In front of that, we have the focusing ring, and this has about the simplest focusing system of any camera I've ever seen. It simply has 4 focusing detents. We have a picture of someone's head, and this is the closest setting, and this is all you have to do to imagine what the focus setting will be. We'll just imagine how close a person is when you're just getting the top part of their shoulders and their head. The next picture shows someone from the waist up. The next person shows a couple of people standing together, and then we have the infinity setting, which shows a mountain. So you can pretty much quickly guess the focusing distance in this camera, and it's quite simple to use. It's very fast, and this makes this camera very suitable for street or candid photography. You don't really have to fumble much with the focus to get it to work. On the very front here, we have the light cell for the light meter, and on the bottom here we have the window, which shows the film speed. And to set the film speed, you simply turn this plastic dial around the lens until the film speed number in the window matches the films you have loaded in the camera. This camera is fitted with a 38mm f2.8 lens, which was new for this camera, but which turned out to be a very excellent lens design. And it was not used only by Yashica, but it was also used in the Konica C35 and other cameras. It was a simple, easy to make, inexpensive lens, but it was an excellent performer for all of that. And these lenses were introduced in the early 70s with cameras like the Yashica MC, and they were in production all the way up until the 1990s. So that gives you an idea of how good they were. It's very rare that we find anything on the market which lasts that long unless it's something really good, and the lens in this camera happens to be really good. Loading the camera in this, or loading the film in this camera, not the camera in this film, is just like any other Yashica Electro 35. You have to take the film rewind dial, pull it out, that pops open the film door. Open the film door like so. Make sure that you keep the knob pulled up. You drop your film canister inside and then push the knob back down. You might have to turn it a little bit to get it to go all the way down. That will lock your film canister into place, and then you just pull the film leader across, feed it into the take-up spool, and simply wind and fire the shutter until the holes on the top and bottom of the film are being taken up by the teeth in the take-up sprocket. And then simply close the camera, and like other cameras, simply wind and fire the shutter until the number 1 shows up and the camera is ready to go. Now this camera features full automatic operation, and it doesn't have anything manual in it. So this camera does require a battery if you are going to operate it. The shutter will fire whether you have a battery in it or not, and but you aren't going to be able to actually take any properly exposed photos unless you have a battery installed in the camera. Overall, this is an interesting camera. I don't see a lot of the 35ME cameras around nowadays, probably because they were such an inexpensive camera that over time, when people replaced their cameras or got something nicer, rather than sell their old 35ME or whatever, they probably just chucked it in the trash. And so for that reason, we don't have a lot of these around today. These are actually a good camera for, as I said, street or candid photography. They are compact. They're about the same size as a Yashica CC or CCN. The slower lens, a lot of people prefer the faster lenses, but the f2.8 lens has more depth of field. This design has more depth of field than, say, the Yashica CC, CCN, GL, GX, or whatever. So you don't have to be as precisely careful with the focus. The scale focus system on this camera is very fast, faster than what we have on the Yashica MC. And yeah, a pretty interesting, simple, easy to use camera with a very short learning curve. Anyway, That's about it for my video today. As I mentioned in previous videos, I'm receiving lots and lots of new cameras, and I plan to make videos about them as they come in. If you'd like to see these videos, you can subscribe, and that way you'll know when they're available. And as I've also said, I'm trying to grow this channel, get more people interested in vintage Japanese cameras and film photography in general. If you click the like button, that gets more people coming to this channel, and hopefully more people learning a little bit about these cameras. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.